Captain Jake Morrison stood in the middle of the huge council chamber. The room was filled with strange beings from all over the galaxy. Some looked like giant insects, others like walking trees, and some were just floating balls of light. They all stared at him with hate in their eyes. The trial had been going on for 3 days. Jake knew they had already decided what would happen to humanity. The alien judges did not care about the truth. They only wanted to stop humans from spreading across the galaxy. Ambassador Kethfer, a tall blue creature with 4 arms, stood up to read the final decision. His voice was cold and harsh. The Galactic Council has found humanity guilty of spreading dangerous ideas. You have taught other species about freedom and democracy. These ideas are against the natural order of the galaxy. Jake wanted to laugh. The natural order meant that strong species ruled over weak ones. It meant that most beings lived as slaves, while a few lived like kings. Humans had shown other species that there was a better way to live. Dr. Lisa Carter sat next to Jake. She was Earth scientist who studied alien life. She had tried to defend humanity during the trial. She explained that humans only wanted to help other species and share knowledge, but the council did not want to hear it. "You humans are like a disease," said another judge, a creature that looked like a giant spider. "Everywhere you go, you make other species question their leaders. You teach them to think for themselves. This causes chaos and war." The spider judge was talking about what happened on Kepler 442b. The native people there had lived under cruel rulers for thousands of years. When human settlers arrived, they taught the locals about human rights and democracy. Within 2 years, the people had overthrown their kings and started their own government. The council called it a rebellion. Humans called it freedom. Commander Ryan Phillips was the head of Earth's military forces. He had been expecting this day for months. His spy network had been sending reports about council ships moving toward human colonies. The aliens were planning something big. Ryan had prepared for this moment. Hidden across the galaxy were small groups of humans and friendly aliens. They had weapons, supplies, and most importantly, they had knowledge. The council thought they could cage humanity, but they had no idea what humans had already built. "The sentence is clear," announced the main judge, a creature made of living crystal. "All humans must return to their home system. No human ship may leave the area around Earth. Any human found outside this zone will be arrested or destroyed." The chamber filled with happy sounds from the alien judges. They thought they had won. They thought they had stopped the human problem. Jake Morrison stood up slowly. He looked around the room at all the alien faces. Some looked satisfied, others looked worried. A few even looked sad. Not all species agreed with the council's decision. "You make a mistake," Jake said in a calm voice. "You think you can put ideas back in a bottle. You think you can make people forget what they have learned. But freedom is not something you can take away once people taste it." The crystal judge's body glowed brighter with anger. "Remove the human from this chamber. The trial is over." As the guards moved toward Jake, he smiled. The council had been watching the wrong thing. They had been so focused on stopping human ships and arresting human leaders that they missed the real threat. The real threat was not the humans themselves. It was what humans had taught other species. Dr. Lisa Carter had spent years working with alien scientists. She had shown them how to ask questions and test ideas. She had taught them that just because something was old did not mean it was right. These alien scientists were now teaching others. Commander Ryan Phillips had trained thousands of alien soldiers in human fighting methods. He had shown them how small groups could defeat large armies using smart tactics. These soldiers had gone home to their worlds and taught others. Most important of all ordinary humans had made friends with ordinary aliens. They had shared stories about Earth's history. They had talked about the American Revolution, when farmers defeated the strongest army in the world. They had explained how slaves became free and how women got the right to vote. These stories had spread from world to world. They had been told around campfires and in secret meetings. Each time the story was told, it changed a little. But the main message stayed the same. Ordinary people could change the world if they worked together. The council guards grabbed Jake's arms and started pulling him toward the door. As he was dragged away, he called out to the chamber, "You are too late. The damage is already done. You cannot stop an idea whose time has come." The alien judges looked uncomfortable. Some of them had heard reports about problems on their own worlds. Workers were asking for better pay. Citizens were questioning old laws. Young people were refusing to follow traditions that made no sense. As Jake was taken to the holding area, he thought about all the humans still living on alien worlds. Many of them had married aliens and started families. Others had become teachers or doctors or engineers. The council could not arrest them all without causing chaos. More importantly, the aliens who had learned from humans were now teaching others. The knowledge was spreading like wildfire. Every day, more species were learning about democracy, science, and individual rights. The council had made their decision. Humanity would be locked away in their home system like dangerous criminals. But they were locking the barn door after the horse had escaped. Human ideas were already running wild across the galaxy. In the holding cell, Jake met with the other human representatives. They all looked worried, but Jake was not afraid. He had seen the fear in the judge's eyes. The council knew they had a bigger problem than they wanted to admit. "What happens now?" asked Dr. Carter. Jake looked out the small window at the stars. Somewhere out there, human-trained rebels were planning their next move. Human-built machines were making life better for alien workers. Human ideas were changing the way entire species thought about government and society. "Now we wait," Jake said, "and we watch the galaxy burn down everything these tyrants have built." 6 months had passed since the council banned humans from leaving their home system. The galaxy seemed quiet on the surface, but underneath, big changes were happening. The humans who had been scattered across alien worlds were not sitting still. Pete Jackson wiped the sweat from his face as he climbed out of the deep mining tunnels on Zarian Prime. The planet was hot and dry, with huge machines digging valuable metals from the ground. Pete had been working here for 3 years, teaching the local workers about human engineering. The workers were called Shithari. They looked like giant ants walking on 2 legs, with hard shell-like skin and big compound eyes. For hundreds of years, they had been mining metals for the council using old, dangerous equipment. Many workers died every year in cave-ins and explosions. Pete had shown them how to build better machines and make the mine safer. But more than that, he had taught them something the council did not want them to know. He had taught them that workers had rights. "Pete, come see this," called out Crix, one of the Chithari foremen. His voice came through a translation device that made all alien languages sound like English. Pete followed Crix to a large cavern deep in the planet's core. In the center of the space was a machine that made Pete's heart race with excitement. It was a fusion reactor, built entirely from parts the Chithari had made themselves. "We used your plans," Crix explained, "but we improved some parts. This reactor will give us enough power to run the entire mining operation without help from the council." Pete stared at the machine in amazement. The Chithari had not just copied human technology. They had made it better. The reactor was smaller and more efficient than anything humans had built. "The council tax collectors came yesterday," Crix continued. They demanded half of everything we mine. We told them we do not need their power grid anymore. We told them we do not need their protection. We are free now. Meanwhile, on the forest moon of Endara, Karen White was working in her garden. The plants here were unlike anything on Earth. Some were as tall as trees, but moved like animals. Others glowed with soft light or sang beautiful songs. Karen had been living with the Silvani for 2 years. The Silvani were plant-like beings who could talk to trees and make flowers bloom with their thoughts. They had always lived simple lives, taking only what they needed from the forest. But the council had changed that. They had forced the Silvani to grow cash crops for export. They had cut down ancient forests to make room for farms. They had told the Silvani that progress meant destroying their traditional way of life. Karen had taught the Silvani about genetics and selective breeding. She had shown them how to grow more food in smaller spaces without harming the forest. Most importantly, she had taught them about the scientific method, how to test ideas and learn from results. The council food inspectors came again, said, "Lyra, a young Silvani whose skin was the color of autumn leaves. They said our new crops are too nutritious. They said we are making other worlds jealous." Karen laughed. "They are afraid you will not need to buy their expensive fertilizers anymore." The Silvani had learned to think for themselves. When the council tried to force them to destroy their improved crops, they simply refused. They had enough food to feed themselves and even help neighboring worlds. Why should they go back to being hungry? In the asteroid belt near Proxima Centauri, Tony Rodriguez was building something that would change the galaxy forever. His mining station had grown from a small outpost to a city in space. Beings from dozens of different species had come here, looking for work and freedom. Tony had started with just a few mining robots and a small crew. But he had taught his workers about automation and efficiency. Soon, their mining operation was producing more metals than entire planets. They were making so much money that they could afford to buy their own weapons and ships. "We got another message from the council," said his assistant, a blue-skinned alien named Vex. "They want us to pay taxes on everything we mine." Tony spat into the recycling unit. "Tell them we are not part of their system anymore. We are free. Miners working in free space." The mining station had become known as Haven Station. It was a place where anyone could come to start over, no matter what species they were or what crimes they might have committed. The only rule was that everyone had to work and everyone had to respect each other. Haven Station was also becoming a center for the resistance. Ships arrived daily, bringing news from across the galaxy. Some brought weapons and supplies. Others brought refugees fleeing council persecution. All of them brought stories of change. Lieutenant Amy Foster was the key to making it all work. She had been a communications officer in the Earth military before the ban. Now she was running a secret network that connected human settlements across the galaxy. Amy had built quantum relay stations that looked like natural space debris. They were hidden in asteroid fields, gas clouds, and the outer edges of solar systems. The council's ships flew right past them without noticing. Through this network, Amy could send messages instantly across thousands of light years. She coordinated supply runs to isolated human settlements. She shared news about successful resistance operations. Most importantly, she helped different alien species learn from each other. "We have a problem," Amy told her team during their daily meeting. "The council is starting to notice that something is wrong. They are sending investigation fleets to worlds where humans used to live." Her team included humans and aliens working together. There was Marcus, a former Earth engineer who maintained the relay stations. There was Zara, a cat-like alien who had learned about human military tactics. There was Gorth, a rock-like creature who was stronger than any human, but had learned about human concepts of justice. What kind of problems are they finding? Asked Zara.Amy pulled up a holographic display showing different worlds across the galaxy. Red dots marked places where the Council had detected unusual activity. On Kepler 442b, the local government is building schools and hospitals without Council approval. On Vega Prime, the workers have formed unions and are demanding better pay. On Wolf 359, the people have stopped paying taxes and started trading directly with other worlds. Marcus whistled softly. Sounds like the revolution is spreading faster than we hoped. Amy nodded. The Council thought they could contain human ideas by locking us up. But ideas do not stay locked up. Every alien who learned from humans is now teaching others. The reports kept coming in. Species that had never heard of democracy were forming their own governments. Worlds that had been poor for centuries were suddenly prosperous because they had learned about human technology and economics. Young aliens were questioning traditions that had kept their people oppressed for thousands of years. General Zextar, the Council's top military commander, was getting worried. His reports showed that the human problem was much bigger than anyone had realized. It was not just about humans anymore. It was about the ideas humans had spread. How many worlds are affected? He asked his intelligence officer. At least 40, sir. Maybe more. The humans created a network that we are still trying to understand. Every time we think we have found all their hidden bases, we discover new ones. Zextar studied the star charts. Red markers showed worlds where humans had lived before the ban. But yellow markers showed worlds where human ideas had spread even without direct human contact. The yellow markers outnumbered the red ones by 3 to 1. They planned this, Zextar realized. The humans knew we would eventually ban them. They spent years preparing for it. Back on Haven Station, Tony Rodriguez received a message that made him smile. It was from Pete Jackson on Zerion Prime. The Chithari had successfully defended their mining operation against a Council tax collection fleet. They had used human-designed weapons and tactics to drive off ships that were 10 times bigger than anything they had. The message also included technical specifications for the Chithari's improved fusion reactor. Within hours, Amy Foster's network had spread the designs to every human settlement and sympathetic alien world in the galaxy. Corinne White received the same message on Indara. The Sylvani were excited to learn about the new reactor design. They realized they could use it to power their improved farming systems and help even more worlds become self-sufficient. The Council had made a terrible mistake. They had tried to contain humanity by building walls. But humans had already dug tunnels under those walls. They had planted seeds that were now growing into forests of freedom across the galaxy. The revolution was no longer about humans versus aliens. It was about free beings versus tyrants, about progress versus oppression, about hope versus fear. And the free beings were winning. The revolution was spreading faster than anyone had imagined. On the desert world of Caridian, where the sun burned hot and the sand dunes stretched to the horizon, everything was changing. The reptilian creatures called Saurians had lived the same way for thousands of years, but now their world was turning upside down. Ben Cooper had been working on Caridian for 4 years before the human ban. He was an engineer who loved building things and solving problems. The Saurians had fascinated him because they were incredibly smart, but had never been allowed to use their intelligence. The Saurians lived in a caste system. If you were born into the worker caste, you worked in the mines or factories until you died. If you were born into the warrior caste, you became a soldier. Only the ruling caste could become leaders, scientists, or artists. It did not matter how smart you were or how hard you worked. Your birth decided your entire life. Ben had quietly taught some of the worker caste Saurians about human manufacturing techniques. He had shown them how to build machines that could make other machines. He had explained that intelligence was not something you inherited, but something you could develop through learning and practice. When the council banned humans, Ben had gone into hiding in the deep desert. But the Saurians he had taught continued. His work, they built secret factories in abandoned mines. They shared knowledge with other workers. They proved that caste meant nothing when it came to ability. Sarak was a worker caste Saurian who had learned the most from men. His scales were brown and rough from years of working in the mines, but his mind was sharp and quick. He had memorized every lesson Ben had taught him about engineering and manufacturing. "Look at this," Sarak said to his friend Vishak, pointing to a gleaming machine in their hidden factory. "I designed this myself. It can make computer chips that are better than anything the ruling caste has ever seen." Vishak's eyes widened. He was warrior caste, but he had grown tired of fighting meaningless battles for the rulers. "How is that possible?" "The rulers say only they have the intelligence to create such things." "The rulers lied," Sarak replied. "Ben showed me that any being can learn to create and innovate. All you need is knowledge and the freedom to use it." Word spread quickly through the lower castes. Worker caste Saurians were building advanced computers. Warrior caste Saurians were designing new weapons and vehicles. Even the servant caste was developing new communication systems. The ruling caste tried to stop them. They sent their guards to destroy the secret factories. But the guards discovered that the workers had built better weapons than the official army had. The revolution had given the lower castes not just new ideas, but new power. On the ocean world of Aquatica, Dr. Helen Price was watching another kind of revolution unfold. The planet was covered entirely by water, and the native nautiloids lived in cities built on the ocean floor. They looked like giant octopi with hard shells and were incredibly intelligent. Helen had been working with the nautiloids to develop new underwater technologies. She had helped them design submarines that could reach the deepest parts of their ocean. She had taught them about pressure-resistant materials and underwater construction techniques. But the most important thing Helen had taught the nautiloids was the scientific method. For thousands of years, the nautiloids had believed that their priest caste could speak directly to the ocean spirits. The priests claimed that the spirits had given them all knowledge, and questioning the priests was forbidden. Helen had shown the nautiloids how to test ideas through experiments. She had explained that real knowledge came from observation and testing, not from ancient traditions or priestly proclamations. "The priests say the deep trenches are forbidden because the ocean spirits live there," said Aquilus, a young nautiloid scientist. "But our new submarines show that the trenches are full of valuable minerals and new forms of life." Helen smiled. "What do you think that means about what the priests have been telling you?" Aquilus's tentacles writhed with excitement. "It means they have been lying to us. They kept us away from the deep waters because they did not want us to discover the truth." The nautiloids began conducting their own experiments. They tested old beliefs and found that most of them were false. They explored forbidden areas and discovered wonders that the priests had hidden from them. They realized that the priest caste had been using fake mysteries to control their society. Within months, the nautiloids had overthrown their priest-ruled government and established the first democracy in their planet's history. They used the scientific method to make decisions, testing different policies and keeping the ones that worked best. Commander Chris Murphy was watching these changes from his hidden base on the moon of Titan 7. Chris had been Earth's top special forces officer before the ban. Now he was training mixed groups of aliens in human military tactics. The aliens who came to his training camps were from dozens of different species. There were the massive, slow-moving Titans from Gravitas Prime, each one as big as a small building. There were the quick, agile flickers from the Nimbus cluster, who could move so fast They were almost invisible. There were the silicon-based crystals from the shard worlds, who could survive in the vacuum of space. Each species has unique advantages, Chris explained to his latest group of trainees. The key is learning how to use those advantages in combination. With smart tactics, Chris taught them about guerrilla warfare, how small groups could defeat much larger forces through surprise, speed, and superior planning. He showed them how to use their environment as a weapon and how to turn their enemies' strengths against them. But most importantly, Chris taught them about coordination. The Council's forces were powerful, but they were used to fighting one species at a time. They had never faced a coordinated attack by multiple species working together. The Council thinks they understand warfare, Chris told his students. They have big ships and powerful weapons, but they fight like bullies, using brute force to intimidate their enemies. We fight like humans, using our brains to overcome superior numbers. The first coordinated attack came sooner than expected. A Council tax collection fleet arrived at the Zarian Prime system, demanding that the Chithari mining operation pay massive penalties for their rebellion. The fleet commander expected the insect-like miners to surrender immediately. Instead, the Chithari activated a plan that Chris Murphy had helped them design. As the Council ships approached the mining stations, they found themselves surrounded by a swarm of small, fast-moving vessels. The ships looked like civilian cargo haulers, but they had been modified with human-designed weapons and armor. The Council fleet was massive and powerful, but it was designed to fight other large fleets in open space. The Chithari ships were small and agile, darting between the asteroids and attacking from unexpected angles. They used the mining charges as improvised weapons, turning the asteroid field into a deadly obstacle course. The battle lasted only 2 hours. When it was over, the Council fleet was retreating, leaving behind 3 destroyed warships and dozens of damaged vessels. The Chithari had not lost a single ship. News of the victory spread across Chris Murphy's network within hours. On Coridian, the Saurians realized that they could fight back against their oppressors. On Aquatica, the Nautiloids understood that the Council could be defeated. On dozens of other worlds, oppressed peoples began to believe that freedom was possible. The Council's response was swift and brutal. They began targeting any world that showed signs of human influence. They bombed factories that used human-designed technology. They arrested leaders who promoted human ideas about democracy and individual rights. But the crackdown only made the rebellion stronger. Every world that the Council attacked became a recruiting ground for the resistance. Every species that suffered under Council retaliation became more determined to fight for their freedom. Amy, Foster's communication network, was working overtime, coordinating resistance activities across the galaxy. Her quantum relay stations carried messages between rebel groups, sharing tactical information and coordinating supply runs. We have reports of uprisings on 17 worlds, Amy told her team during their daily briefing. The Council is losing control faster than they can respond. Marcus, her chief engineer, was monitoring Council communications. They are calling for reinforcements from the core worlds. They want to deploy their full military against the Outer Rim territories. Amy nodded grimly. That is what we expected. The Council cannot afford to let the rebellion succeed. If the outer worlds become free, the core worlds will start demanding their own freedom. The technological revolution was becoming a political revolution. Species that had been oppressed for centuries were suddenly discovering their own power. They were learning that they did not need the Council's permission to live their own lives. On Haven Station, Tony Rodriguez was coordinating supply runs to support the growing rebellion. His mining operation had become a crucial source of raw materials for the resistance. The metals his workers extracted were turned into weapons, ships, and communication equipment. We got another refugee ship, reported his assistant Vex. 300 beings from the Altair system. The council bombed. Their industrial centers for refusing to pay increased taxes. Tony looked out at the growing fleet of Sevilla. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was the largest gathering in the organization's history. Representatives from every member species had come to the capital world of Centralis. The massive crystal dome that housed the council chambers was filled with angry voices and worried faces. Supreme Chancellor Vex Thala stood at the center of the chamber. Her crystalline body pulsed with different colors as she tried to maintain order. The Prism Worlders like her had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years, but now their authority was crumbling. Order! Order! Vex Thala's voice boomed through the chamber's speakers. We are here to address the crisis that threatens our very civilization. The crisis was worse than anyone had imagined. What had started as a simple quarantine of humanity had turned into a galaxy-wide rebellion. Reports kept coming in from every sector of space. Species that had been loyal for centuries were suddenly declaring independence. Worlds that had never caused trouble were now refusing to pay taxes or follow council laws. Ambassador Kethfer, the blue-skinned diplomat who had prosecuted the humans, stood to address the assembly. His forearms gestured wildly as he spoke. The human contamination has spread beyond our worst fears, he announced. The Chithari have declared complete independence. The Saurians have overthrown their traditional government. The Nautiloids are spreading their so-called scientific revolution to every world in their sector. A representative from the Dominion Guard, a military species known for their loyalty, interrupted. What about the enforcement actions? Surely our fleets can restore order. General Zextar, the Council's top military commander, stood up slowly. His reptilian features were grim as he activated a holographic display showing the galaxy. Red dots marked worlds in open rebellion. Yellow dots showed worlds with suspected resistance activity. Blue dots showed worlds still loyal to the Council. The situation is challenging, Zextar admitted. The rebels are not fighting like traditional military forces. They use hit-and-run tactics, coordinate attacks across multiple systems, and seem to know our plans before we make them. A holographic display showed the shocking truth. Nearly half the galaxy was now marked with red or yellow dots. The Council's authority was collapsing faster than their fleets could respond. How is this possible? Demanded the representative from the mining guild. These are primitive species with inferior technology. How can they resist our advanced military? Zextar tail twitched with frustration. Because they are not primitive anymore. The humans taught them about manufacturing, weapons design, and military tactics. They have built their own fleets using human-inspired technology. Some of their ships are actually superior to our own. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Some representatives demanded immediate military action. Others suggested negotiation. A few even wondered if the Council should consider the rebels. Demands for democratic reform. Supreme Chancellor Vex Thala made the decision that would change everything. We will use the orbital bombardment platforms. Any world that refuses to submit to decontamination will be destroyed as an example to others. The orbital bombardment platforms were the Council's most feared weapons. They were massive space stations that could destroy entire planets from orbit. The Council had used them only a few times in their history, always as a last resort to maintain their authority. The first target was Haven Station, the asteroid mining base that had become a symbol of human-inspired independence. The Council's intelligence services had identified it as a key coordination point for the rebellion. They believed that destroying it would break the rebels' morale and end the uprising. Commander Steve Walsh was Tony Rodriguez's second in command. At Haven Station, he had been a naval officer on Earth before the ban, and now he was responsible for the station's defenses. He knew this day would come eventually. Contact incoming, reported the sensor operator. Council Enforcement Fleet, estimated 40 ships including 2 bombardment platforms. Steve looked around the command center. The operators were from a dozen different species, all working together to defend their new home. They had been preparing for this moment for months. Send the evacuation signal, Steve ordered. All civilian ships are to leave the system immediately. Combat vessels will remain to defend the station. The evacuation had been planned and practiced many times. Within an hour, hundreds of civilian ships were fleeing the system, carrying refugees and essential supplies to other resistance bases. But 3,000 beings had chosen to stay and fight. The defending fleet was a mix of converted cargo haulers, mining vessels, and purpose-built warships. They had been constructed using human engineering principles and alien innovation. Each ship was designed to be fast, agile, and deadly. Admiral Crox commanded the Council fleet from his flagship, the Dominion's Pride. He was a veteran of many campaigns and had never lost a battle. He expected this to be a simple operation. Destroy the rebel base and move on to the next target. All ships begin bombardment, Crox ordered. Destroy everything in the asteroid field. The Council ships opened fire with their massive energy weapons. Asteroids exploded into dust and debris. The bombardment platforms began charging their planet-killer weapons, preparing to vaporize Haven Station itself. But the rebels had learned from human military history. They knew they could not win a direct confrontation with the Council fleet. Instead, they used the asteroid field itself as a weapon. The mining charges that had been placed throughout the asteroid field began detonating. In sequence, the explosions were carefully timed to create a chain reaction that sent massive rocks hurtling toward the Council ships. The asteroids became giant projectiles, moving at incredible speeds. The Council fleet found itself in a nightmare. There, sensors were blinded by the debris. Their formation was broken as they tried to avoid the flying rocks. Their large ships were perfect targets for the small, agile rebel vessels that darted between the asteroids. Steve Walsh coordinated the defense from Haven Station's command center. He had studied every human military victory where smaller forces had defeated larger ones. This was David versus Goliath, but with spacecraft instead of slings. Focus fire on the bombardment platforms, Steve ordered. If we can disable their main weapons, we can win this battle. The rebel ships used tactics that the Council had never seen before. They worked in coordinated groups, attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. They used the asteroid field's complex gravitational fields to slingshot around obstacles and attack from unexpected angles. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, Haven Station was badly damaged, but still functioning. The Council fleet was retreating, leaving behind the wreckage of 14 ships, including both bombardment platforms. Admiral Crox himself was among the dead, but the victory came at a terrible cost. Haven Station's population had been reduced to fewer than 500 survivors. The asteroid field that had been their home and workplace was now a debris field, filled with twisted metal and frozen bodies. Steve Walsh stood in the damaged command center, looking out at the destruction. His communications officer, a young flicker named Zix, approached him with a message from the Resistance Network. "Sir, we are receiving reports from across the galaxy. The news of our victory is spreading faster than the Council can contain it. 17 worlds have declared independence in the last 6 hours." Steve nodded grimly. The destruction of Haven Station had been the Council's attempt to intimidate the rebellion. Instead, it had proven that the Council could be defeated. It had shown that their supposedly invincible military could be beaten by ordinary beings fighting for their freedom. Recordings of the battle spread through Amy Foster's quantum relay network within hours. Every resistance cell in the galaxy could see how a small force of defenders had defeated a massive Council fleet. The tactical innovations used at Haven Station were quickly adopted by rebel forces everywhere. But the recordings also showed something else. They showed the Council's willingness to use genocide as a weapon. The bombardment platforms had been preparing to destroy Haven Station completely, along with every living being on it. The Council was revealing its true nature to the galaxy. On Caridian, the Saurian rebels watched the recordings with growing anger. Their traditional rulers had always claimed that the Council was a benevolent organization that protected weaker species. Now they could see that the Council was willing to commit mass murder to maintain its power. "The Council lied to us," said Serac, the worker caste engineer who had become a leader in the rebellion. "They said they were protecting us from chaos and war, but they are the ones bringing death and destruction." On Aquatica, the Nautiloid scientists analyzed the tactical data from the battle. They were impressed by the innovative use of gravitational fields and asteroid debris as weapons. But they were horrified by the Council's attempt to destroy an entire civilian population. "This is not justice," declared Aquilus, the young scientist who had helped overthrow the priest caste. "This is terrorism. The Council is trying to rule through fear and violence." The news of Haven Station's destruction spread to worlds that had never heard of the rebellion. Species that had been loyal to the Council for centuries began to question their allegiance. If the Council was willing to destroy Haven Station, what would th? 2 years had passed since the Council first banned humans from leaving their home system. The galaxy was completely different now. Half the known worlds had declared independence from the Council. The other half were quietly preparing to join. President Catherine Adams sat in her office on Earth, reading the daily reports from Amy Foster's communication network. The planet was still under quarantine, surrounded by Council blockade ships, but the human spirit was running wild among. The stars every day brought news of new victories. Former slave species were building their own governments. Oppressed workers were forming unions and demanding fair treatment. Young beings across the galaxy were questioning traditions that had kept their people down for thousands of years. The Altair system declared independence this morning, reported Admiral Jake Morrison, who had returned to Earth after the trial. That makes 47 star systems that have broken away from the Council in the past month. Catherine smiled as she looked at the star charts. The red dots marking free worlds now outnumbered the blue dots marking Council territory. The revolution had grown beyond anything the humans had imagined possible. "What about the vote?" Catherine asked. Jake's expression became more serious. "The Council is still trying to organize their galaxy-wide referendum, but they are having problems. Many species are refusing to participate. They say the Council has no authority to ask for their approval." The Council's plan for a referendum had seemed clever at first. They would ask every species in the galaxy to vote on whether the Council should continue to exist. They believed their propaganda machine could convince most beings to choose stability over chaos, but the Council had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed that most beings in the galaxy were still loyal to them. They had not realized how much human ideas had changed the way people thought about government and authority. On the desert world of Caridian, the Saurian Revolution was complete. The old caste system had been completely destroyed. Former workers were now running their own factories. Former warriors had become teachers and engineers. The ruling caste had either fled the planet or learned to live as equals with everyone else. Sarak, the former worker who had become a leader in the revolution, was now the elected president of the new Saurian Republic. He stood before a gathering of representatives from other worlds, sharing the lessons his people had learned. "Freedom is not something you can give to others," Sarak explained. "It is something each being must claim for themselves. The humans showed us that we had the power to change our lives, but we had to do the work ourselves. The Saurian Republic had become a model for other worlds. They had proven that different castes and classes could work together as equals. They had shown that democracy could work even among species that had never known it before. On the ocean world of Aquatica, the Nautiloids were leading a scientific revolution that was changing the galaxy. Dr. Helen Price's lessons about the scientific method had inspired a new generation of alien researchers. Aquilus, the young Nautiloid scientist, had become famous throughout the galaxy for his discoveries about deep ocean ecosystems. But more importantly, he had become a symbol of how scientific thinking could free people from superstition and ignorance. The priests told us that the deep waters were forbidden, Aquilus said during a broadcast that reached millions of worlds. They said the ocean spirits would punish us if we explored too far. But science showed us that the only spirits in the deep waters were our own fears. The Nautiloid scientific revolution was spreading to species that had never questioned their traditional beliefs. Young beings across the galaxy were learning to test old ideas and think for themselves. Ancient superstitions were crumbling as new knowledge spread from world to world. Commander Chris Murphy's military training network had evolved into something even more powerful, a network of peacekeepers and conflict resolution specialists. The beings he had trained were no longer just learning how to fight. They were learning how to build lasting peace. Violence should always be the last option, Chris explained to his latest group of students. The humans learned this lesson through centuries of war. Real strength comes from solving problems without fighting. The former rebels were now helping to establish new governments and resolve disputes between different species. They used the skills Chris had taught them, but they focused on building rather than destroying. Meanwhile, the council was falling apart from within. The core worlds that had always supported the galactic government were now questioning their loyalty. Citizens on these worlds had heard the stories from the Outer Rim. They had learned about the prosperity and freedom that came with independence. Supreme Chancellor Vexthala called one final emergency session, but only half the council representatives showed up. The massive crystal dome that had once been filled with hundreds of delegates now echoed with empty space. "We must find a way to restore order," Vexthala pleaded. "The galaxy is descending into chaos." But General Zextar, the military commander, who had tried so hard to stop the rebellion, had a different perspective. "Chancellor, I have traveled to many of the rebel worlds in recent months. I have not seen chaos. I have seen prosperity, cooperation, and hope." Zextar had been shocked by what he found on the rebel worlds. Instead of the warfare and disorder he expected, he found thriving communities working together to solve problems. Former enemies were cooperating on trade agreements and scientific research. The humans were right, Zextar admitted. Freedom does not create chaos. Oppression creates chaos. When beings are free to make their own choices, they usually choose to work together rather than fight. The final blow came from an unexpected source, the vote itself. The council had hoped that their referendum would restore their legitimacy. Instead, it became a platform for the rebellion to present their case to the entire galaxy. Representatives from the free worlds were allowed to speak during the voting process. They described life under the new democratic governments. They shared stories of technological progress and social cooperation. They explained how former enemies had become friends when they were no longer forced to compete for the council's approval. The speeches were broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy. Beings who had never heard about the rebellion suddenly learned that there was an alternative to council rule. Citizens on loyal worlds began demanding the same freedoms that the rebels had achieved. When the votes were counted, the result was overwhelming. 78% of the galaxy's population voted to dissolve the council and establish a new federation based on democratic principles and individual rights. The remaining 22% were not forced to join the new Federation. They were allowed to form their own confederation under the old system, as long as they did not interfere with the free worlds. Amy Foster watched the vote results from her communication center on a hidden asteroid base. Her quantum relay network had carried the voting data from thousands of worlds. The numbers were clear. The galaxy had chosen freedom over oppression. "We did it," Amy said to her team. "The revolution is complete." But Marcus, her chief engineer, was more thoughtful. "No, the revolution is just beginning. Now we have to prove that freedom can work on a galactic scale." The new Galactic Federation held its first constitutional convention on a neutral world in the frontier region. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to draft the governing documents for their new civilization. They used human documents as their starting point: the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But they adapted these ideas for a galactic civilization that included species with very different biologies and cultures. Admiral Jake Morrison, now representing Earth in the new Federation, stood before the assembled delegates. The quarantine around Earth had been lifted, and humans were once again free to travel among the stars. 2 years ago, the Council called humans dangerous, Jake said to the gathering. They were right. We are dangerous to tyrants, dangerous to oppression, and dangerous to anyone who believes that sentient beings should be controlled rather than free. The applause that followed Jake's speech came from hundreds of different species. The sound was unlike anything ever heard before, a harmony of voices representing every corner of the galaxy, united by shared values of freedom and dignity. Quarantine had ended, but its effects would last forever. Human ideas about democracy, individual rights, and scientific thinking had infected the galaxy beyond any hope of cure. The damage was done, and it was beautiful. Tony Rodriguez, now director of the Federation's Economic Development Program, smiled as he read the reports from across the galaxy. Former mining slaves were building their own prosperous communities. Species that had been enemies for centuries were working together on joint projects. The galaxy was more prosperous and peaceful than it had ever been under Council rule. The Council was afraid that human ideas would destroy their civilization, Tony said to his staff. They were right. We destroyed their civilization and built something better in its place. On Earth, President Catherine Adams stood before a crowd of millions as humanity celebrated its return to galactic civilization. Children who had never seen an alien being waved flags representing dozens of different species.